Carl Jung once discovered that a startling percentage of his most dangerous patients shared a single psychological warning sign before they became destructive. What unsettled him was not their aggression or obvious malice, but rather how ordinary and even charismatic they appeared on the surface. They seemed harmless, yet beneath that facade lurked a subtle but devastating shift in the way their minds worked. Jung insisted that once you recognize this sign, the only real safeguard is to step away without hesitation. The danger does not show itself in loud hostility. It operates in quiet, almost invisible ways, and this is exactly what makes it so treacherous. According to Jung, the sign emerges when a person begins to project their shadow onto others with absolute conviction. The shadow, in Jungian psychology, is the hidden reservoir of traits and impulses that an individual refuses to acknowledge in themselves. Most people assume projection is just an abstract theory, but Jung saw it as something far more practical. It was, in his eyes, an early warning system for human relationships, a sign that could determine whether you were safe or about to be drawn into a destructive spiral. In 1913, Jung treated a patient who forever changed the way he understood this phenomenon. The man was charming, articulate, and outwardly compassionate, yet Jung noticed something deeply unsettling. Whenever the patient described others as cruel, manipulative, or corrupt, Jung realized that those very qualities were the ones the man himself was repressing. He was not simply misjudging people. He was systematically projecting his own disowned traits onto everyone around him. Within a matter of months, this projection wreaked havoc. 3 relationships collapsed, 2 colleagues lost their jobs, and his brother suffered a nervous breakdown. Astonishingly, through it all, the patient maintained an image of innocence, convinced that he was merely the victim of betrayal and misfortune. What Jung witnessed was not a simple misunderstanding of character. He was observing one of the most dangerous psychological mechanisms in human interaction, the unconscious projection of the shadow fused with absolute certainty. This combination, Jung realized, had the power to unravel not just personal lives, but entire social structures. What makes shadow projection so insidious is that the stronger the projection becomes, the more convinced the person feels of its truth. It creates a psychological feedback loop that can entangle families, workplaces, and even entire communities. Ancient wisdom traditions recognized this long before Jung gave it a scientific language. In Buddhism, there is the image of the dark mirror that reflects one's own impurities, as if they were external objects. In Christianity, there is the warning about noticing the speck in your brother's eye while ignoring the beam in your own. Jung took these metaphors further. He observed that people who project their shadow are not just misperceiving reality, they are constructing an alternate reality that feels fully authentic to them and, over time, increasingly convincing to those around them. The warning sign emerges when there is a complete disconnect between how someone describes you and the inner truth of your own experience. They attribute thoughts, feelings, and motives to you that have never existed in your awareness. What makes this especially disorienting is the absolute confidence with which they do it. The intensity of their certainty can cause you to question your own sense of reality. This is psychological manipulation at its most subtle. It is not deliberate deceit, but an unconscious distortion of reality that can drive its target into genuine psychological collapse. Yet the projection itself is not the most dangerous part. The real danger lies in how unconscious projectors draw others into their distorted world. Jung referred to this as a form of collective possession. When an entire group begins to see reality through the lens of one person's projection. Modern psychology provides an explanation for how this happens. Leon Festinger's research on cognitive dissonance revealed that when someone presents their distorted perception with absolute confidence, others often feel internal pressure to adjust their own perception to match it, even when it contradicts their direct experience. This is why families sometimes turn against the very member who is being scapegoated. It is how workplaces can rally against an innocent employee. It is how communities can destroy an individual based on accusations that have no grounding in actual events. The projector becomes the silent center of a psychological storm, unconsciously orchestrating others to attack the very traits they cannot accept in themselves. Jung observed this pattern most vividly in his most dangerous patients. They were not merely projecting their shadow, they were constructing entire social systems around those projections. The target of their projection often became isolated, psychologically destabilized, and eventually destroyed by a collective illusion they never had a hand in creating. From his years of clinical study, Jung identified 5 unmistakable warning signs that indicate when shadow projection has crossed into dangerous territory. The first sign is absolute certainty about the motives of another person. Instead of saying, "I think you might be," they insist you are. They claim to know with total confidence what lives in your inner world, your intentions, and your character, often more strongly than you could describe yourself. The second sign is immunity to contradictory evidence. No clarification, explanation, or proof can shift their conviction. In fact, your attempts to correct their distortion are reinterpreted as further evidence that they were right all along. The third sign is emotional intensity far out of proportion to the situation. They react with overwhelming anger, fear, or hurt to minor or even non-existent offenses. Their emotional charge reveals the content of their projection rather than anything you actually did. The fourth sign is the consistent victim narrative. No matter how the story unfolds, they always emerge as the innocent victim of malice, manipulation, or cruelty. The cast of characters may change, but their role as the wronged party never does. The fifth sign is manipulative recruitment. They work to draw others into their distorted perception of you, often through conversations that sound caring or concerned about your behavior or personality. Beneath the surface, the aim is to make others see you through their lens. When all 5 signs converge, you are not dealing with a misunderstanding or a clash of personalities. You are confronting unconscious shadow projection that will escalate until it destroys something vital: your reputation, your relationships, or your peace of mind. Jung noted that shadow projection tends to follow a predictable pattern of escalation. The first stage is the initial projection, when subtle accusations or misattributions appear. At this point, they may seem like harmless misunderstandings. The second stage is the crystallization of belief. The projections grow more frequent and more certain, while the projector loses all doubt in their perception, despite your attempts to clarify. The third stage is reality distortion. Everything you do is filtered through their projection, and even neutral actions become proof of hidden hostility. The fourth stage is social enlistment. They begin sharing their concerns with others, always from a position of apparent care or worry. By the fifth stage, collective possession takes hold. People around you start to adopt their distorted lens, and accusations emerge from multiple directions, as if out of nowhere. The sixth and final stage is systematic exclusion. The group organizes itself around the shared projection, gradually isolating or attacking you for traits that exist only in the projector's unconscious. Recognizing this pattern can save years of psychological damage. The crucial moment is stage 2. If you can identify the crystallization of belief early and withdraw before the projection gains collective momentum, you can avoid being swept into the destructive cycle. But shadow projection was not the only warning sign Jung identified. He also discovered a psychological state that he considered even more dangerous: the inflation of the ego. While those who project the shadow unconsciously can be destructive, the inflated ego operates with a conscious belief in its own integrity while remaining completely blind to its shadow. These individuals are not only projecting what they cannot face, they become fused with archetypal forces that far exceed the capacity of their personal psyche. The result is a kind of possession in which they embody the savior, the wise man, the bringer of truth, or the judge of justice. Unlike overt narcissists, who are easier to recognize. Inflated individuals often appear enlightened, morally superior, or spiritually advanced. Their apparent greatness makes them infinitely more dangerous because people are willing to surrender their judgment and authority in the presence of someone who seems to radiate higher knowledge. Jung noted that this archetypal possession gives them an aura of inevitability, as if they carry divine sanction, while in reality, they are simply overwhelmed by contents too vast for their ego to contain. There are clear warning signs when dealing with someone who has fallen into ego inflation. One is the complete absence of self-doubt. Where genuine spiritual teachers express humility before mystery, the inflated ego speaks with absolute certainty about its perceptions and judgments, interpreting any disagreement as evil or ignorance. Another is a unique blend of charm and rigidity. Their conviction draws others magnetically, yet their inflated state eliminates flexibility of thought. They cannot entertain alternative perspectives because their sense of authority feels absolute. Jung warned that individuals overtaken by this condition eventually collapse under the weight of the psychic pressures they have identified with. But before that collapse, they often inflict deep harm on others, fueled by their unwavering belief in their own righteousness. The third dangerous sign Jung described is complete identification with the social persona. The mask we wear in public, which is meant to be a flexible interface with society, becomes the only identity such a person recognizes. Jung called this the problem of the perfect individual. It is the danger of someone who adapts so thoroughly to social expectations that they lose all connection to their authentic self and to their shadow. The risk is subtle, because those who live through their persona often appear as models of social virtue. They know exactly what to say, how to act, and what expressions will win approval. Yet beneath this polished exterior lies a disturbing emptiness. When a person invests all of their psychic energy into maintaining a flawless public image, the denied aspects of their shadow do not disappear. They build within the unconscious like pressure in a sealed vessel, waiting for the moment when the mask can no longer contain what has been repressed. The warning signs of persona identification are often subtle but unmistakable once you learn to recognize them. One is an almost unnatural social perfection. These individuals never seem to have a bad day, never reveal a human contradiction, and never show the rough edges that belong to ordinary life. Another is a strangely artificial quality in their interactions. Everything may be correct in tone and manner, yet something feels hollow, as though you are speaking to a carefully constructed performance rather than a person. A third sign is the disproportionate reaction to any perceived threat against their image. Even minor challenges to their perfect mask can trigger defensive responses far more intense than the situation warrants. Jung recorded how those who live entirely through the persona often experience what he called shadow eruptions. These are sudden, destructive outbursts when all the repressed material hidden behind their perfect mask bursts forth in ways that can shock and destabilize others. The more flawless the persona appears, the more chaotic and dangerous the eventual eruption tends to be. Perhaps the most alarming sign Jung identified was archetypal possession. This occurs when an individual loses their personal identity and becomes a channel for transpersonal forces beyond their capacity to integrate. You can recognize this state when someone's personality seems to vanish, replaced by something ancient and impersonal. Their eyes change, their voice shifts, and they begin to speak with an authority that does not belong to their personal experience. They may embody the eternal victim, constantly suffering and demanding rescue. They may take the form of the warrior of justice, fighting cosmic battles against evils that only they can see. Or they may inhabit the archetype of the sacred parent, treating adults as children in need of guidance and control. The person under archetypal possession experiences an extraordinary sense of certainty and purpose. The ordinary ambiguity of human consciousness disappears, replaced by an absolute conviction that is deeply persuasive to others. Yet this is precisely what makes it dangerous. Archetypes contain polarities. The same archetypal energy that inspires saints also produces fanatics. A person possessed by the savior archetype inevitably expresses its shadow side, often becoming the very force they believe they are resisting. Jung documented cases in which such individuals carried out actions completely at odds with their conscious values, later either forgetting what they had done or constructing elaborate rationalizations to explain the contradictions. The final dangerous pattern Jung identified is what he called repetition compulsion. This is the unconscious drive to recreate painful situations again and again while believing oneself to be the victim of cruel fate. On the surface, it may seem less dramatic than archetypal possession, yet it quietly ensnares others in unresolved psychological dramas. The warning sign is a striking repetition of painful themes across different relationships and contexts. No matter who they are with, the same story unfolds, following a script that is almost identical. What makes it uncanny is that they often appear genuinely surprised each time, as if life itself were conspiring against them, rather than recognizing that their unconscious is the architect of the recurring pattern. The danger lies in being drawn into someone else's psychological drama. If you fail to recognize it, you may suddenly find yourself cast in a role that began long before you entered the picture, often as the betrayer, the abandoner, or the persecutor. Jung referred to this as negative synchronicity, the unconscious ability to arrange encounters that replicate the original traumatic script. Those trapped in repetition, compulsion, unconsciously broadcast signals that attract people capable of helping them recreate the very wounds they cannot escape. Once you recognize these dangerous patterns, the natural question is how to protect yourself. Jung's protective protocol was deceptively simple. Conscious awareness combined with immediate boundary enforcement. Step 1 is to trust your intuition. If someone's perception of you consistently clashes with your lived inner experience, rely on your own reality rather than their projection. Step 2 is to avoid trying to persuade them. Individuals caught in shadow projection, ego inflation, or archetypal possession are immune to contradictory evidence, and attempts to convince them only reinforce their distortions. Step 3 is to limit information. Do not provide personal details that can be twisted into evidence to support their projections. Step 4 is to keep records. Document conversations and events, since projectors often rewrite history to fit their distorted narrative. Step 5 is to seek outside perspective. Speak with people you trust who know both you and the projector, and verify your perception against voices that are not caught in their field of distortion. Step 6 is to withdraw when necessary. Sometimes, the only way to preserve yourself is to disengage entirely. If someone displays multiple dangerous signs, a strategic retreat may be your only real protection. Think back to the patient who forever altered Jung's understanding of human danger, the man who destroyed relationships while maintaining a mask of innocence. Jung eventually realized that this patient's projections were not random. They were systematic efforts to avoid facing his own capacity for manipulation, cruelty, and selfishness. The unconscious mind was projecting these qualities outward so that he could feel pure, all while unconsciously enacting the very behaviors he condemned in others. This is the tragic paradox of shadow projection. A person becomes what they most fear or despise, all the while blind to the transformation taking place within them. Yet Jung believed there was a way through. Conscious recognition of these patterns breaks their hold. When you can name shadow projection, ego inflation, persona identification, archetypal possession, and repetition compulsion, you are no longer a passive participant in their unconscious influence. Awareness turns what is hidden into something visible, and what is visible loses its power to secretly direct your life. The most dangerous people are not those who openly show their darkness, but those who remain completely unaware of it. Yet the moment you begin to recognize these patterns, both in others and within yourself, You step outside their psychological jurisdiction. Jung devoted his life to mapping the perilous landscapes of the human soul, not to cultivate fear, but to create freedom. Freedom from unconscious manipulation, freedom from the distortions of projection, freedom from being cast into roles in dramas that were never yours to begin with. The most dangerous psychological sign Jung described is not projection alone. It is the total lack of awareness of one's own shadow, combined with unshakable certainty in one's perceptions. When you encounter someone who embodies this, remember Jung's haunting words: "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. Those who cannot accept themselves will inevitably transform you into the container for everything they cannot bear to face." Your protection does not come from battling their projections. It comes from holding a conscious awareness of what belongs to you and what belongs to them. That awareness is your shield against the most destructive psychological forces in human relationships. Have you ever encountered these warning signs in your own relationships? Share your experiences in the comments. Sometimes recognizing the pattern in the past can protect us in the future. And if you found this exploration meaningful, subscribe for more insights from Jungian psychology that can transform the way you navigate the hidden dynamics of human connection. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next dimension.